Everyone, thanks for joining us today. We're going to give another minute for folks to join, and then we'll get started with intros. We have a great panel put together today with Derek, Jason, Rohini, and Mark. So we'll talk about that in just a second. Just going to give us a little bit here so we can all hang out. And a couple housekeeping announcements. We have an audience chat on the sidebar. So if you look top right for you, the audience chat, you can put things in chat, say hello, put your LinkedIn profile, whatever works best there. There's also a Q&A tab at the top. So if you want to put any questions there, I'll be watching chat as we go, and we can get to those at the end. We will have some time for Q&A. All right, we're one after. I hate the awkward silence, even though I'm a big fan of The Office. So I'm going to let us get started with introductions here. This is a really important topic. I'm seeing this on LinkedIn all the time about intent. Is intent data dead? And in many cases, I think it's people misinterpreting what it is, what we should do with it, how it rounds out the picture. But great group of folks today to talk about how this is hurting our pursuit of pipeline and what we need to do to make it better. So Derek, I'd love to kick to you to introduce yourself, and then we'll let everyone introduce themselves before we get started.
Yeah, happy to, Chris. And I guess good to see everyone virtually and agree with you. Really important topic and looking forward to today's discussion. As you see by title, Derek Schoettle, CEO at DemandScience. And by way of background, I've spent the last, 25 plus years in and around technology. I think most notably, I was CEO at ZoomInfo for an important part of that company's journey, and probably spent the last 10 years really focused on go-to-market tech. But my core background was infrastructure, software, and data. So data has been near and dear to my heart for decades, and so very much applies to today's discussion, and looking forward to it. So pass it to Jason.
Good morning, everybody. Jason Chapman. I'm the COO of Go-to-Market Fabric. In terms of my background, spent a decade doing strategy consulting, and then another decade putting that to work. So for me, I'm interested in the application of the data to help organizations make better decisions around scaling profitable and dependable pipeline. So looking forward to the conversation. And Rohini, I'll kick the ball over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Derek and Jason. Good morning, good afternoon, evening, everyone. Great to be on this webinar today. So I'm the CEO of Edge Insights. I joined them a couple of years ago. We have gone through significant transformation at Edge, all about providing proprietary intelligence to go-to-market teams so that they can grow their revenue. I have an interesting background as well, like Derek. As a customer of Edge and been around in the Valley, both big companies and small companies for a while. So I understand the challenge of revenue growth, retention, and what it means, especially in the world of data and AI. How do we use that to driving revenue growth is critical. So happy to share my learnings as well. Wonderful to be on the call, and over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Rohini. And good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Mark Wheeler. I have been a multi-time CMO. I like many of my peers here. I have spent the last 30 years actually in the tech industry, working for brands such as EMC and Adobe. But latterly, I have spent my career has been with some European-based hypergrowth scale-ups, which is where I think I've really got to learn a lot of my chops, really starting to think about systematic demand and starting to think about how do you scale efficiently and drive accelerated growth in an organization. So that's a little bit about me. Back to you, Chris.
All right, thanks. Nailed that. Great job with the transitions, everyone. So really good work there. To get us started, Derek, I'm going to kick over to you first, but I do think that there's been this perception in the field of intent over the last decade where when we see intent data, it's a hot lead. Let's go after them now. They're ready. Dial up the phone, dial for dollars kind of thing that's happened. I'd love to get your stance on how you think the world is working around intent data today and the visibility that we see.
Yeah, it's a near and dear topic. And I think I think back to maybe a different time in the market, 2015, 16, 17. when everything was growing. SaaS was kind of at an all-time high, running everything was running in the right direction. So there was very little, pressure applied to intent, because the simple thought was, and it was better market times, if someone's searching for something, it must mean that they want to buy something, because everyone had kind of superfluous budgets and there was nothing but, in limited scrutiny to said budget. But I think now in a world where there's a lot more pressure paid to every dollar that's spent to drive outcomes, intent, it doesn't stand up as well as I think people thought it might on its own, because the presumption that, I'm searching for something, it may be out of curiosity or it may be out of, actual intent, but it may not be that I'm even qualified to make the decision. If I were to ever be, if someone was going to reach out to me and say, oh, you searched for DB2, that means you want to buy DB2. No, in fact, it means I spent 5 years at IBM running DB2 and I'm curious to see the latest release is. I don't want to get a cold call. And I think the other part to this, and I think this is actually the exciting part of the kind of this next chapter, is I think of it as a mosaic where intent very much has a right to participate in helping dictate where a salesperson, a marketing organization spends time, but not in isolation. Because I think what ends up happening is a lot of frustration emerges if it's in isolation. I think of it as a mosaic where if you are able to kind of marry that signal with the appropriate kind of ancillary data and context, and then set appropriate expectation, intent can still be an important part of that bigger picture. But on its own, I think, the numbers speak for themselves. And all of our customers kind of lament this frustration is they've all spent a lot of money on intent in isolation, and the results just aren't showing up.
Yeah, I love that. Jason, Rohini, Mark, any thoughts there? And one thing, I did a pretty poor job of setting this slide up, so I'll do better next time. But the 26% of intent signals that are converting to real opportunities, that's a massive problem. And we're going to talk more about the problem on the next slide. But all things I know from being an analyst for multiple years, everyone wants conversion rates. They want, how do I go from stage to stage to stage to stage? So I'd love to open it up to everyone else. Any thoughts you have around what's going on before we dive deeper into the problem?
So I'll just add on and add to what Derek mentioned. One is, I think Derek used the word context, he used the word intent, and also explained the history a little bit. I think what is relevant in this very dynamic world is really contextual intelligence of every account, every prospect, every customer, giving them all the context like, hey, is this a retention context? Is it an expansion context? Is it a new customer context? And using intent as a input is going to be the new way forward, right? This is where marrying different types of signals like, hey, historical time series data or the buying group intelligence, and then taking buyer intent, like he's the buyer looking for a product. When you marry these different types of signals and derive contextual intelligence for a customer, that'll become critical. And the other part that becomes critical is, depending on the sales cycle, this contextual intelligence cannot be just in time, right? It has to be just in time on a continuous basis. Let's say it's a sales cycle for an infrastructure product. You need that signal for 6 months, not for one time I got a lead, because by the time you execute the lead, the whole context would have changed.
And I think, Rohini, part of that is intent is not a shortcut for strategy. And what I mean by that, there was a phrase that I heard a long time ago, and I've loved it ever since, which is strategy is knowing which customers you will happily let your competitors win. Because the reality is, just because somebody has intent and is in market doesn't mean that they're in market for your specific solution, or that it's worth you investing your scarce sales and marketing dollars to win an account that may never be profitable for you. And so understanding that fundamental is still required in order to take advantage of what intent can offer us.
Yeah, Jason, let me just add to that. One of the things I often see a lot of time spent on trying to improve this number to a better outcome is a lot of teams, to be fair, the majority, try to fix this problem downstream. giving the BDRs better scripts, trying to figure out how you get faster follow-up, more nurture. And that's kind of treating the symptom, whereas really the issue or the lever is actually upstream of the issue. And that's really starting to figure out, as Jason was saying, who are the high propensity accounts where we actually really want to monitor these signals so that we can figure out timing and buying groups, as we were hearing from Rohini. So yeah, it's a challenging one, but I see a lot of effort going into the wrong part of the equation to solve the issue.
Yeah, really good feedback there. And Rohini, let's bring it back to you, because I think you were starting to hit on this too. But we know that visibility does not mean they're ready to buy, so that's a given. But I'd love to hear how you're thinking about the problem when we think about the attention that we see from intent, and if that means commitment. And as we hand to sales, and Mark was just talking about, well, we need a better BDR script, right? So walk us through what you think the problem is here, and then we'll open it up to everyone else.
Yeah, great question, Chris. Intent, I know there are different types of intent, all the way from high-level intent where customers are searching for a product or a product category to all the way to a specific solution. Intent, like what Jason was telling, like intent indicates that customer is researching a specific product or a specific category. But what is more important is that is good, but that is one lens. But what is important is layering out the complete context for a customer. For example, Pfizer could be using a Cisco firewall in New York, okay, and they could be researching or searching for a product, another firewall in EMEA region. So if you take it in context that Pfizer is an existing customer of Cisco, and layer that, hey, they're researching for a new firewall in EMEA region, then it's an expansion context, right? If you say that, hey, if you don't, if they're researching for a firewall in the same place, let's say New York, it is a displacement context or a customer retention context. So you need to layer in different types of signals to really understand the context. Otherwise, what happens is it just becomes noise. You're like, hey, you have intent, you're going after lots of things, but you don't have the complete picture. And then that becomes a challenge. And again, the complete picture has to be a steady stream of signals for several months until the signals move to closed one, where the customer really wins an outcome here. So hopefully that gives some good examples there, Chris.
Yeah, definitely. I'll open it up to the panel. What are you all thinking about? And Mark, you hit on this too. I think when everyone's getting the same signals, maybe we are jumping straight to what do our BDRs need to be saying to differentiate? But I'd love to get everyone else's thoughts.
Yeah, I think,
go ahead, Jason.
No, I was just going to say, building on what Rohini was saying, poor pipeline is the root of all evil. It leads to a whole host of bad behaviors. And one of the things that we see challenged is when pipeline is declining, sales is eager to get their hands on something. They just want to start working, even if the buyer is in their own journey is not ready for that conversation. And sometimes we skip ahead and we use intent as a means to sort of push a lead to sales without the necessary pre-work that reflects and respects the buyer's needs in that process. And I don't know, Mark, I mean, you live and breathe this every day. What are you seeing?
Yeah, exactly that. To be fair, it's got better, right? Because I can remember the times when that Derek was talking about, when marketers first got their hands on this technology and capability. A signal came in, and we almost raised this thing as an MQL, right? It went through to sales, and sales went, look, they had a look at they downloaded something from our website. Go to ring them right away, and of course, the BO would have a go at it. And of course, they were kicking the tires. They were in the early phase. And I think now we're starting to get, hopefully, a little bit more sophisticated. The other angle I've also seen where intent has been, I think, misused is in actually building an ICP. In other words, here's 1,000 accounts that the system is saying in motion. So that's our ICP. And again, if there isn't the right fit, then it's not worth us wasting our time. As you said, Jason, it's, we end up going chasing things that are never going to work for us. So yeah, I've definitely seen, and I'll put my hands up. I've made those mistakes as well, right? So yeah.
Well, I always share this anecdote. Earlier in my career, I was at a database company, and we had a PLG sales motion, and so you could sign up using a Gmail address. It was mobile and web application developers that were, searching for a back end. It's going to go cloud. And an email came through a Gmail address. I won't use the name because it ended up being, and I followed up on it because none of the other salespeople would, because I was just trying to be fanatical about it. Anyone who came in and wanted to learn more about our business, we should follow up. And it turned out that person was the lead developer for Samsung's Milk application, which was going to be their competitor to iTunes, and received a bunch of fanfare and ended up being one of our largest customers, investor, and a key partner. And I always share that anecdote to say that you never really know who it is on the other end of the line. But that is literally like 1 out of a billion. Like, it was all the bad behavior. Like, you shouldn't be following up with the Gmail addresses. You shouldn't be following. What you should be doing is like trying to understand what's the origin story. What are they doing with the product? Do you understand like what best looks like? What is an alpha customer? I mean, I sympathize with our market broadly and our customers that are trying to kind of see their way through all the noise. Because the other, I like anyone who's trying to look at or buy technology or products in general are inundated with content, like absolutely inundated. They're getting calls, they're getting emails, they're getting invites, they're getting traced everywhere. It is, how can you show up? And I think Rohini used the right word. And I think if there's one takeaway for today, anyone listening, the future of our world is context. It's dynamic context, really understanding what is it this person's needs are, and can you connect with them and provide them an answer, a solution? Because people don't need to be sold. They need answers. They need solutions. They need help. And I think the trick with, this attention, versus, intention is this myriad set of little signals that you can stitch together to say, no, this is an account. This is a buying group. This is a persona. This is a contact. This is a chain of custody that, you should lean into as an organization. And then how you translate that into a BDR, an SDR, a marketing campaign, what have you, I think is a bit of art and science combined together. But it is, I think on its own, it's daunting. It's daunting. And this is the great fear. It's like if everything just goes agentic and all of a sudden agents are selling to agents, and we kind of remove all of the kind of signal that you would typically collect from, human interaction, which I don't think is going to happen, but you could certainly, you can appreciate that intent and all this content is causing buyer fatigue. And so it's incumbent upon anyone who's trying to market and sell, you've got to be really thoughtful about providing context and consistency. And I like the term ambient. Ambient marketing is similar to ambient light, where it's always on and you're constantly probing your ICP, your audience, your segment, your geo, your offering, to try and find patterns that take this confluence of signal, it resonates, and you execute. And then everyone's happy, seller and buyer. And I think that's what we all aspire to. I mean, certainly DemandScience, we talk about that all the time. It's like we want to be sure that we, drive demand that's going to leave both parties satisfied, not fatigued and, disenfranchised.
Yeah, you haven't lived until you've downloaded an ebook and then your phone ring instantly. Yeah. Those are the days. Yeah.
I mean, some of the most vicious debates we ever got into at Cloudens, at Vertica, at IBM even, was like, do you mandate on a form fill an email address? Because God, as soon as you put that email in, it's, good luck.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Derek, let's stick with you on this one and talk about the path forward. So you were hitting on.
Yeah.
So this is where we're starting to introduce this concept. And then Jason's going to talk us through the shift. And then Mark's going to give us some great examples, and Rohini's going to help bring us home. So we've got the path here, but When we think about a true account that's winnable, what does that look like to you?
Yeah, it's a great question and somewhat of a follow-on to my soliloquy there a moment ago. The best adage I use is that expression of why swing a dull axe. Let's spend all of our time sharpening our axe, and instead of swinging it 100 times, let's swing it 10 times, but fell the tree. It's efficient. It gets you the outcome with far less energy, and it's repeatable. And I think winnable accounts to me is the epitome of that, because it emphasizes the context and the research and the intelligence that should be applied to the audience or the market or the competitive context in which you exist. Marrying that then to, okay, what is actually happening dynamically in the market right now? So static is a company, a product, the context. The behavior is all the dynamic. Putting those two things together and finding symmetry and efficiency is sharpening the axe. And I think that's the aspiration and the end state, so that instead of leaving all of these different signals independent of one another, you find a way to unify them, organize them, and then execute against them, and then leave them on. I mean, my biggest frustration is once you have these answers in execution is the tendency of, and Mark, you can tell me I'm wrong or right on this, but my observation, both personally in our own efforts, but then also more broadly in our customer base, is they're turning the knobs up and down all the time. And they're changing the messages so frequently, it's hard for any, synchronicity to play through. So leaving it ambient and always on, and intelligently then orchestrating it so that you can land on that account when it gets the right signal with the right message is really the aspiration. And I think the solution.
Yeah. Yeah. Derek, I remember when we were chatting about this the other day, you had a little bit of I think it was a music or radio anecdote for this.
Oh yeah, tuning the radio, absolutely. Yeah, well, I can say, I mean, listen, everyone is out there and there's lots of knobs and dials, and it's really difficult to hone in on adult contemporary playing the song you want at the time you want perfectly. You get to a station, it's playing the wrong music, and or there's an ad on, and or you're catching the last bit of the song, and none of it makes sense to you. That's what current state marketing feels like, is everyone's out there tuning knobs and dials, and they're not actually finding classic rock with the Doors playing, LA Woman. And I've just disclosed a lot about my musical preferences, but nonetheless, but I think that is a winnable account system. It's like, I understand the machine I'm using, I understand the signal I'm trying to get to, and the time at which I need the outcome to occur. That is the winnable account system.
Yeah. One of the things I've certainly found with some of the intent signals that you can acquire today, is that many of them actually just give you this answer. And they don't actually explain how they gave you what the math was behind the actual answer itself. Right. So you're like, yes, this account's ready to move. Okay, how did you work that out? No, there's no detail behind it. It's just trust me on this. They're ready to move, and of course that doesn't help either. So explainability is very, very key, because one of the things I've certainly seen is that when you have an over-reliance on intent signals in your motion, it is very likely that you perhaps have burnt your relationship potentially with the sales team, right? Because
sure.
you lose the trust, right? It's sort of like, yeah, but the machine told us this.
Don't you remember the early days of intent? It was a digest similar to what you used to get in anti-spam and antivirus filters. It was this long list of URLs and account names and some kind of nominal score, and it was just no context, no kind of understanding. It went into the round filing cabinet in every salesperson's desk. It completely missed the mark, because where do you start? Where do you start? Yeah,
and I do think now many marketing teams are starting to ask the tougher question of, unless I can explain the number, or I can explain the attribute of this, or the attributes that have defined this intent, then this isn't going to work for us. So I'm definitely seeing really marketing teams really starting to understand those knobs and dials, as you were saying, Derek.
But I think part of that, Mark, is intent isn't this monolithic binary thing, right? The reality is it's a collection of signals that you have to triangulate, because it's the difference between talking about an organization that has some firmographic or technographic characteristics versus the behavior of individuals across that organization. And it requires the ability to understand and disseminate, where am I seeing patterns? And it's not just on the basis of researching either, right? You look at the preconditions for buying behaviors. Is there a new executive that has come in? Have they done M&A? Has there been a regulatory shift that's requiring them to look at a new piece of software, or something fundamentally changing in their market or their business that's, again, getting back to Rohini's point, sets the context for why somebody is in market? And that's the key to understand. It's the strategic rationale, so that you can connect on them at that level, not just, hey, I saw you were comparing features across different ERP competitors.
Yeah.
Well, a step further, Jason, in a perfect world, if I know an executive is looking versus, a practitioner versus a influencer, like, the more I can shape who and provide that context, the message then, and the urgency with that message. I mean, I'll tell you, if I was selling to a CTO versus a CEO and a CFO, very different approaches. I mean, like, dramatically different approaches. And I think that's the aspiration of a winnable account, is that it gives you that next layer of intelligence that is very crisp, that you then can take your signal and tune it based on what you're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, I really like the radio analogy that Derek was using, the tuning of the stations and getting to the right place, right song, etc.
What song are you listening to, Rohini? I want to know the song you want to tune into.
Well, I have an analogy, right? So we always spoke about this concept of product market fit, right? Product market fit and then scale. If you look at it, it's very parallel, right? You have products that you want to sell, and you're trying to create a fit in the market. What is the fit? Your fit is, first of all, you need to understand not only just the ICP that Mark and Jason were talking about, but getting into the specific list of accounts, which are your SOM accounts, SOM is really your serviceable, obtainable market, not only just based on your product readiness, but also based on your go-to-market readiness. Do you even have a go-to-market team in EMEA, for example? If your product, you might have a great fit for an account somewhere in EMEA, but if you don't have a sales team, how are you going to approach it? What's your SOM account? Right, that's the product market fit aspect. And then layering in all these context signals to say, okay, I'm in my ICP, I'm in the right set of accounts, right? Now I'm going to layer in the context. Is this a current customer, or is this a competition displacement, or is this a white space? What is the context? Then you understand what is your buying group, to Derek's point, like, hey, how do I pitch? Is it a CEO, CTO, CFO? My context is different, the buying group context. And then you look at, is this a retention, expansion, new context? When you start bringing all these signals, then you clearly know whether is this a winnable account or not, because it almost becomes very clear, hey, this is an ICP, okay, it fits into our SOM accounts, the propensity is good, and prioritization is good, we scored well, there is intent, it is a white space account, we are a perfect match, right? There is no competition, they don't have existing products that are using it, boom, right? You have a best shot for the sales team to go pitch it. It's all about winning that account at that time. So that's how I see that winnable account concept, like taking the product, mapping the product market fit in a very data-driven context, or through real-time intelligence, and then doing it at scale, right? With this contextual intelligence is what makes this winnable accounts really move at scale.
Yeah, I love that. And Mark, I know you had an example here for us to talk through too. So I'm going to click to this next slide, and then we're going to jump to you, Jason. But Mark, tell us about what you're seeing from the field and how this is related.
Yeah, look, so I love my analogies too, but I can't go with Derek's, because I think it might surface my favoritism for 80s classics, which probably doesn't make me very cool. So I'm gonna go with house buying as my analogy. But before I do, this is one of the things that I think we've all talked a little bit about now. Was I think we all jumped in deep into intent and try to maximize that. But the real learning for me, the shift, if you will, was when I stopped asking who's active this week and started asking who can we actually win. And now becomes the moment, right? So 2 different questions, completely different pipeline. So let me describe what I'm talking about. So think about it like buying a house in a hot market. So propensity is really the boring work that you do long before anything, a house comes up for sale. So think of it this way, right? You pick the neighborhood, and then you think about the firmographics and technographics, if you will. But the analogy here would be, has it got a shopping center nearby? Has it got a doctor's nearby? Has it got a local schooling system that we want for our kids? So what are the attributes that really make up the perfect environment for us to find our future house? You know what you can afford, you kind of get the financing arranged, you build a relationship with an agent. That's fit. Now, the important thing here is that doesn't change week to week. So that's really where I start things. Then comes the just listed alert, right? It tells you that a house is on the market now, and that's the important thing, right? Because what you're starting to get is signals on houses for sale that fit your criteria. And when you start to arrive at that situation, the likelihood of you winning is far, far higher. Now, here's the part everyone tends to forget. The moment a good house gets listed, right, every buyer in the area gets the same alert at the same time on the same morning. So by the weekend, you're potentially in this bidding war. But turning up at the house isn't an advantage, right? The buyers who win, I think, and if you've been through this process recently, you know exactly what I mean. The buyers who win are the ones who did the work months before, right? It's the ones who actually started to do the setup. They're not just reacting to the alert, they're kind of ready for it. And so that's intent data. It's very good at telling you the house is on the market, but it was never going to tell you whether it was the right house for you. And the intent data is pinging our competitors at exactly the same time. So now I've run this for real. I've obviously led marketing in a number of organizations now. And we built the list the other way round, right? We started with propensity. That's where we started to win. We acquired the technographic and the firmographic data so that we could start to shape and understand where we've been successful in the past. We often refer to these as lookalike accounts. So when we start to look at the 1,000 accounts where we have been most effective, the fastest to win, they've been the accounts where the sales team have said, those were the perfect attributes that helped us to win. We've looked to really understand those in terms of the technical environment, the install base, the firmographics, and then we started to really look for accounts that mirror those same attributes, and that started to form our list. If you like, it's the houses that had the schools, the shopping, the theatre nearby that we really wanted. That helped us before we ever started our intent pieces of work. So that's really what started to help us drive up our level of conversion. And I think it's a really important discipline that marketing departments need to spend the time on building before starting to look at intent. So that's really been the key win for us, Chris.
I love that.
And Mark, I love the house analogy as well, because if you extend that, on average, it takes 10 to 25 showings for a house to sell. There was plenty of intent signal there, but only one buyer.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is the buying journey is also not linear. Think about it. Like, you can see houses and you can explore neighborhoods. And once you learn more, you realize how much you still don't know. And sometimes you do go back to square one, or sometimes financing falls through, or you do an inspection for a whole host of exogenous reasons. Now may not be the right time. And so I think that's the other part of it, is there's a dynamic aspect of this, of what does the window look like? And again, respecting that buyers may shift and constantly evolve. And Derek, I think that gets back to your point about this always on conversation, because it's not a one and done single moment of time engagement model.
No, this is, I've not used spent a lot of time in the database market, but that was one of the trickiest bits, is selling to developers. Developers, by their nature, are always looking at a toolkit. They're always trying to find another way to do something more efficiently, more effectively, solve problems. It doesn't mean they want to buy it. So whether it's downloading Postgres or they're looking at an instance of CouchDB, it doesn't mean you need to call them and harass them. But if you have a way to kind of tease out levels of engagement and the kind of propensity, which, I think, Mark, to your point, are they at an account in a market? Do they have existing technology that looks like they're either trading away and or they're upgrading, so that you can then offer signal collection? So for us at Cloudant, it was, did they create an account? Did they create objects in the online database? Did they create a query? And did they go to support? If you got those 4 things, you would then say, okay, hey, we should really lean in on this. And that equivalency for me is, are they, is your ICP showing up on your website? Are they looking at, different elements on your website? Are they attending events? Are they, responding to emails within a certain period of time? Are they actually, like, that mosaic that you're trying to tell a picture? Because I'll tell you this, never more frustrated. If you're in the business of selling something that's got a 6-figure ASP and longer than 90-day sales cycle and has multi-touch from executive, technical, and sales resources, it's expensive. So every cycle that you're spending with an opportunity at an account that isn't winnable is incredibly cost prohibitive, especially database, middleware, anything that's got longer sales cycle. Because, and trust me, having grown up in sales, you want to advocate for things that you think you can win, but that doesn't always mean that's aligned with what the broader mission or mandate is. Trust me, if someone showed up today and said, I'm going to go chase a Gmail address without any context because I think it's the white whale, they wouldn't be around for very long, right? Versus if they showed up and said, I'm really interested in mobile and web application development. Here are the companies, here are the people, here's the context, here's the message. That's where we are. And I think we got to shoot with rifles, not shotguns. Like, we've got to be really thoughtful.
Yeah. Derek, go ahead, Rohini.
Doing a webinar with some great leaders, and they came up with all these nice analogies. I like this house analogy as well. And I was last few minutes I've been mapping this in my head, right? The main thing that I see is in this house analogy also, right? You're trying to understand, what is the buyer's expectation, or the seller, what is he willing to pay to buy? Like, you don't want to search for a house all over the world. You want to search in the neighborhood you're looking for. And within that house, you want to know the price and the features and the capabilities. And then, in specialized markets, you got to address or attack it in a very specific way. And, we are in a very dynamic market, right? Where the buyers are changing jobs and, there are layoffs happening, reorganizations happening. So when so much of that is happening, this whole context, everything that Derek was explaining, like all the way till the message that a seller gets, a customer receives, has to be very precise and continuous. Like, otherwise what happens is you created all this great message. By the time your seller showed up, your marketing showed up, their entire reorg has happened, their priorities have changed. So the pitch is no longer relevant. All the intent money that you paid, or leads money you paid, or something else you paid, it's gone down the drain, right? What you need instead is, okay, now my sales team is showing up today. Today, what is the context? What is the just-in-time context contextual intelligence, right? Right, like I'm having a conversation with Cisco's executive team today. The context is today, like, what are their priorities? They just went through a reorg last month. I'm sure there is a set of leaders, etc. What is important for them: revenue growth, retention, or some specific product category growth, etc., etc. And if I'm doing a follow-up pitch next month and things have changed, my pitch has to change again. The context is different, etc. Right? So that is the dynamic world we have entered or arrived. Actually, we have already arrived in this dynamic world of AI has forced us into that dynamic world. So it's now if you look at hyperscalers, for example, hyperscalers have been developing this playbook of a data-driven go-to-market for a while, right? Like if you look at all the big companies like Google, etc., they have been at this problem for a while. But now, and that's an advantage to them because they already developed their playbook and automation, everything. Now, if you look at everyone else, they have to get into that dynamic world because they're dealing with this dynamic world, or they have arrived in the dynamic world. How do they get real-time intelligence at their fingertips? Be very precise, very smart, that can power your entire cycle, whether your marketing team, your sales team, your SDRs, your BDRs, all of them have to be orchestrated around the same thing. Otherwise, what happens is my SDR could be calling a CMO that left or a CRO that left the organization, whereas my salesperson could be reaching to a new VP of marketing, and the marketing could be targeting a director of marketing in a certain one. It's all disconnected. You don't get the results also. If you want to truly measure revenue outcomes, which is another favorite topic, I know Derek and I spoke at length about outcomes, which is where we are heading as an outcome economy. I think this precise intelligence stream tying to outcomes becomes very important, and hopefully that's a topic for another day, but hopefully that gives additional context as well.
Yeah, great stuff there, Rohini. And I have a segue that is house related to get us to Jason to talk about the shift forward. And the house that I am in now, we built 8 years ago, but we watched a builder finish out our neighborhood, a different builder than we built with. And one day our now 14-year-old was playing with his grandson, and he came up and rang our doorbell and said, "Hey, I'm sure you love your home. I know you've been here about 3 years, but I'm building a new neighborhood a mile away. And if you want to come check it out, you could have one of the first lots." So I've only sold one lot so far. And he saw we had a new baby. We had a 2-year-old. He had a grandson, same age. They might not love their house. They might love their house, but right down the street, there's going to be a nicer neighborhood. You could build a bigger house, and you've watched me build this house. And literally, there was no consideration set. We came, looked at lots, picked a lot, and that's the house we've been in for 8 years. So he was ahead of that signal of getting that email, right? Like he did his research. He saw it firsthand. And Jason, I know you're really passionate about the shift and how we start to move forward and making this better. So I'll kick it over to you.
Yeah. And what that reminds me of, Chris, actually is imagine that the customer gave you perfect information about their propensity and that they were in market. What if they gave you the answers? And oftentimes that comes in the form of an RFP. The customer's literally telling you, we want you to apply because we are in market for a solution. But how many of us can build a viable business solely on the basis of replying to RFPs? Very, very few. And part of the reason is exactly what you highlighted, which is if you're just responding to RFPs for companies that are already in market, someone else has defined the rules of the game before you even step on the pitch. And that's part of the challenge. Of course, we all want to go after those high likelihood, high activity opportunities and to basically support our sales team. But the reality is those are costly deals to win. And oftentimes we're intercepting, it's an interception motion of a process that has already been along the way. And we all know how much research goes into these buying decisions, where in reality, by the time that your salespeople engaged, the customer is not looking to educate themselves. They're already educated. They're looking for confirmation. And so the challenge becomes, how do we do things upstream, sort of at the top of the funnel, and people would argue the dark funnel, to help cultivate and build awareness for companies that may not even be problem aware, to say nothing of category aware or solution aware. And it's unsatisfying in a way, because those are longer term engagements. They require 17 to 25 touches, just like the number of buyers that have to come through to see that house. It's a patient game, but this is where organizations that are able to build a quality balanced portfolio of both motions, I think, are set up to win.
Yeah, Jason, I mean, just to add to that, I know many sales teams now that have chosen not even to respond to RFPs because, as you say, it's just too late.
Yeah.
And so why invest the time in something we're going to lose because this was established for another vendor?
I mean, the other interesting part, Jason, about this stage and likelihood and level of investment, back to this kind of undercurrent of context, I think of like any new trend. So when cloud comes along, open source comes along, edge computing, IoT, pick it, automation. The first time that was ever brought to market, people rejected it. There's like any adoption curve that comes along, and there's a corresponding set of marketing tactics and expected pacing and performance. So there's this kind of maturity of market and the dexterity that you need in order to educate a market, make them, to your point, problem aware, solution aware. And I think the balancing act there is, how do you manage your spend across that mosaic of signal and priority? And then the last part, and this is probably the most difficult, how do you get a sales team to comply with that? How do you get a kind of a sales motion even better, to where they're multi-sport athletes, where they can kind of put people in different stages based on their readiness? But I just provide the context, and you're always on. Like the ambient kind of outreach, so that you can develop, if you're in a territory, you got to be able to speak multiple languages and manage multiple stages. It's not just everything, you got to hammer everything's a nail. The great database expression. It's like, if I'm selling a column store database, everyone needs a column store database. It's not true. And I think that's a bit of the sophistication, is like, let's start plotting where our market, our ICP, our buyers, so on and so forth, are relative to our offering. Rohini, to your point, it's like, we've launched a lot of new offerings. It doesn't mean all of our existing customers are going to be ready to adopt. In fact, it's by design not the case. We're trying to open up new markets, new buyers. And so the time it takes to educate them, build the brand, build awareness, educate them to the problem, it's subtle and it's nuanced. And I think no more so problematic because of the glut that AI is producing all the content. I mean, the world's awash in content. So finding a way to kind of organize, prioritize, and then kind of sequence how you activate your sales spend against that marketing spend really is, I go back to the knobs and dials. It's like, we talk about it internally all the time. It's just, how do we balance this out? We're selling into organizations from the largest to the, relatively smaller, and they all require different things, and they all require and are sending different signals. And so coordinating all of that really is, I think, the art and the science of this next chapter. And it's going to be fascinating. I mean, it's going to be fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, Derek, sorry, I was just going to say on that, I think it's the aggregation of these signals and really starting to look to interpret and understand that is where I would spend my time today. And coming back to something Rohini was saying earlier, this is where contextual intelligence is just critical, because if you really think about intent, it's a measure of timing. If you can start to contextualize and really aggregate these intent signals, it's a bit like this. So, if I download a white paper on a topic, because I'm looking to learn a little bit more about it, don't call me. The timing's wrong right now. Do not call me. But if what you find is 2 or 3 weeks later, you find from a bunch of other people in our organization, like, for example, someone in security, and maybe someone from IT, and maybe a couple of my team members also starting to engage perhaps on your website or starting to engage in other forms of content, what you're starting to see is a clear buying group forming. Now that's the time. So if you really think about intent and the aggregation of those signals and starting to figure out how to manage those, it's all about timing. That's what it's about. And then when you layer that in with contextual intelligence, you can start to build something pretty special for your salespeople. Like here's the account battle card. What we saw was X, Y, and Z. So this is where AI starts to, if you can layer that in on top of it, is you can start to provide account battle cards. What we have seen over the past month is Mark did this. Not a lot happened for a few weeks. But then suddenly we saw his security team starting to investigate what does it take to deploy this particular platform, and should there be some enterprise-wide concerns, for example. So now you're starting to build a picture, and it's tuning that picture over time and starting to go, okay, this pattern. I think, Derek, you found some patterns when you were in the database market where you saw attributes of product utilization. It's about starting to figure out what's your pattern.
Yeah, I like that. 100% agree.
That's what starts to define things, I think.
Yeah, very interesting. Actually, this slide lays it out very well and really connects to the concept we spoke about earlier, right? The outcomes, the business outcomes. At the end of it, what matters for every business leader is, are you driving revenue growth? Are you driving retention? Are you driving go-to-market efficiency? Which is the problem that you're trying to solve? Sometimes all the above, but everything that you do, like Jason explained, the rightmost quadrant leads to outcomes. The bottom two columns lead to wasted efforts or activity, busy activity, but no outcomes. So that's where we are heading. And if you really map it to what's happening in our current world of where we are entering a world of autonomous agents, where I would call it a hybrid autonomous agentic world, where we are going to bring all of our expertise from marketing, sales, RevOps, and all functions to do go-to-market. Then the agents are doing a bunch of automation to run, call it campaigns, or to do some cold calling or something else. And imagine if you take the same house analogy that Mark was talking about. If let's say agents were searching for a house, what would they do? Right? They will take the precise criteria that you have. They're going to look for a house that is open. They're not going to bid on a house that is not open, that is not in market. Or just because there is a house that is in market in some other region, they're not going to just go bid. It is all going to be specific criteria that maps to real buyer's outcome. Right? Same way here, if the seller is trying to sell a product with an outcome of growing revenue, X percentage of revenue, where agents are automating certain tasks and humans are providing additional expertise onto it, what really matters is what context and intelligence do you provide these autonomous agents so that they can, you tell them that, hey, what my outcome is more important, right? You start with your business outcome. I want to grow my revenue by 25%. One of the CMOs, when I was on a call at a large company, I think she explained it like, hey, my goal is really to generate X $1 million of pipeline that is going to convert at Y percentage rate. And I'm going to be measured by the revenue outcome, but not by all the busy business activity. If you take that outcome, you start with your business outcome, right? Hey, we have to grow the revenue by $10 million, which means the CMO gets a target of, call it $50 million of pipeline with at least 20% conversion rate, or $30 million of pipeline at X% conversion, whatever that is. If you take that as an outcome, then how do you feed the agents? How do you feed your marketing team, sales, RevOps, they feed the intelligence and context? That way it leads to conversion is the problem that we're all pitching from different angles, but that's what we're trying to solve and where we are heading.
And Rohini, what I love about that is you could satisfy the needs of the CMO and optimize for coverage. You could satisfy the needs of the CRO and optimize for conversion, but you also have to meet the needs of the CFO and optimize for efficiency, because growth and conversion is not the same as profitable growth. And I think that's a lot of what this slide speaks to as well, which is that wasted effort, scarce resources, and our valuable human experts. How do we deploy them in the most efficient way, augmented with all of these AI agents to be able to help them drive that productivity? So I don't think it's an either or anymore. I think it's how do you meet the needs of the business across.
It's all of the above. It's all of the above.
Exactly.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, great stuff. And I didn't want to click slides in the middle, but Rohini, you were hitting on some great takeaways, and we were all covering some next steps there. So this is our very last slide. I'll try to work in a question if we have time. There is one that came up about, Mark, your lookalike accounts. So if you want to cover that in your wrap. But for this part here, I just love to leave every single attendee with the most important takeaway that you're thinking about that they should take back to their desk and start working on today. So Rohini, we'll start with you.
Very quick summary in the interest of time. Start with your business outcomes, whether it is growth, retention, operational efficiency, and map those metrics to your function. If you're marketing, it maps to a certain set of priorities. If it's RevOps, it could be propensity modeling, territory planning. If it your strategy teams, identifying the right SOM accounts with ICTP planning is important. So take the business priorities, map it to your functional priorities that will tie to outcomes, because that's what we're all going to be measured on every day. Now, when you take that, what kind of intelligence, real-time intelligence that we spoke about contextual intelligence on a continuous basis, like live stream is the word that Derek was using. How do we take that and feed all these teams to achieving the outcomes is critical. In that process, technographics is important, propensity modeling is important, intent is important. All of these are important signals that feed into that continuous stream of contextual intelligence that ties to business outcomes. So those are my takeaways, and over to Derek or Mark.
Yeah, sure. I mean, well said, Rohini. And I think the thing I would kind of triple down on is context. I think in every aspect of our business, and just thinking of the challenge for DemandScience as we try and navigate this next chapter of going to market, is context and communication. I think there's the digital communication that Rohini's referencing, that we're entering a world of agentic orchestration and workflows and data being a degree removed from human interaction, and making sure that we understand the context, market, all the things Rohini was just saying, and then finding the common denominators, because too often we work with customers, and then we have a practice internally called customer zero, kind of consuming our own champagne, as it were. Even that we struggle to coordinate across function. So making sure the teams are on the same page, the priorities are the same, and I can only imagine, I lived this when I was at IBM, trying to get the left shoe and the right shoe and the left hand and the right hand all orchestrated in a world where you're trying to please a market's buyers and competitive realities, context and communication. I think that is, like, especially now, if I'm in a leadership position, running a team or a marketing organization, I am just restlessly kind of pushing that context and that communication to really get to ground truth on what's happening.
Yeah, and so my would be, really start with the who, because when you're starting to think about efficient growth and starting to make sure that you're hitting your dollar spend efficiency goals, which are increasingly prevalent, particularly for CMOs today, start with the who. And this is where I think propensity really matters. So I've got a question here. Mark, what were the inputs into the lookalike model? Good question. So essentially, we had actually over 1,000 different attributes. We work very closely with HG Insights, actually, who have extensive technographic attributes. Now, we did look to try and whittle that down a little bit by working side by side with the sales team. But what sometimes is interesting, that you sometimes just don't know, is there are certain attributes in your best accounts that you just perhaps didn't know about. And so what we did was we heat mapped those attributes. So when you start to suddenly see that out of your top 1,000 accounts, 400 of them have adopted another technology, we didn't know that. That's certainly interesting. And so sometimes there are these aha moments that perhaps you perhaps didn't know about before. So I try to look at these things with a very open mind. I get sales input. I think that's very important. But at the same time, we heat map against multiple technographic and thermographic attributes to see whether there are some aha moments that perhaps we were unaware of. And then after that, we then start to use those attributes to score every single account. So we apply a weight and we score every account, and that's what essentially helps us to build our propensity list. So I'm hoping that answers your question. There's a lot of detail to it, but hopefully that was a quickish answer.
And I think, Mark, one of the important steps after you've done that hard work, because it is rooted in that, you have to give your people, and increasingly now your agents, permission to say no. They have to be able to make smart decisions about where to focus scarce resources on these winnable accounts. And it's as much about the strategy as it is the culture to introduce that discipline to walk away from unwinnable opportunities.
Outstanding. Great job, everyone. You nailed it. Mark, masterful job of working in that question there. I had other questions. We'll try to address those in our email follow-up. We put a link in here for winnable account reports too. So if anyone wants to get one of those, grab it. But Mark, Derek, Jason, Rohini, thank you so much for your time. Outstanding job. We'll be sending this recording to everyone, and I really appreciate it. Thanks all.
Cheers.
Good week. Thank you.